Hey, Jiezhen, so excited to have you on the show. It's awesome to have a social entrepreneur here who has not only really crushed it in Southeast Asia, but also come to some process of letting go of that crushing it. And so I'm excited to hear your journey.
Oh yeah, thanks so much, Jeremy. Thanks for having me. Definitely happy to share more about this very colorful journey, if I just say so myself.
Yeah, quite some time since our times hanging out together in Boston and Harvard. So I think, Jiezhen, I just got to ask you, who are you?
Hmm. I think that's that ever evolving question, right? And I think that's something that I've really been sitting with, especially in the last year or so, um, as I think about who I am. And I think every day is honestly a new. And I think I'm learning to make peace with that instead of it's like perfectly packaged, idea as a social entrepreneur. I think I didn't even identify myself as a social entrepreneur for a while until someone called me that. I was like, oh, I guess that's what I'm doing. And almost taking this, it's almost like taking a journey, I think different reflections of who you are and how people see you and making sense of that and then choosing how you present yourself to the world. So who am I? I think I'm many things. I'm most recently a mother and a parent, a wife, a sister, uh, Singaporean. So many identities that I think I carry, and they're ever evolving. And I think they've have taken different, um, levels of importance, different seasons of life. And so I think that question is such an important question to always ask ourselves. Like, you say, who am I, and who am I to be as well. Um, so yeah, thanks for a good opening question, Jeremy.
Yeah, and one thing is that you were the leader of the Hidden Good, and that's how I first got to know you as someone who was really aggressively there and owning the role of being a social entrepreneur. So, how did you first get into it?
With the hidden good. Yeah, I mean, after I graduated, college, I really wanted, I had this dream, like that desire of making a difference, right, and making a positive difference in the world. So I started in education first, and early childhood, and I think that's something you're very familiar with. But really interested in early childhood because I felt it could close a lot of the gaps that were out there in terms of equity and access and everything. And I think I soon found that in being in the space that I was really drawn to the larger, more systemic changes that could happen as well. And all this time I was in the US and felt that there was a lot of stuff happening here in Asia, and just keeping that finger on the pulse and being still engaged and involved in what was happening. And when I was looking for, what would be that next thing for me as in my career and those opportunities, I think I was turning 50 years, 50 years old, young that year. And really interested in coming back to, be could watch it happen from afar, but coming back and being part of that change and wanting to build, a Singapore that I wanted my children to grow up in, that I wanted to be a part of as well. So being okay with that, I think is um and making that decision to move back. So that was when I came back to hit Singapore, a social movement at that time, and I had that opportunity to kind of come in and build it. And I remember being like, I don't really have much experience in building and growing an organization, but the board felt that it was a good fit. And I think in terms of like, there was a very deep level of resonance in terms of what the Hidden Go was trying to do and the beliefs that they had of world is just sometimes a bit hidden. So it was almost like an accidental kind of falling into this role of becoming a director and growing that for the next 5 years and into what it is today. So I'm still on the board of the Hidden Good, and it was amazing just being able to be in the social impact space and um, bringing together different partners, creating content that inspired people to see the good around them. Because I think sometimes in the social impact space, we tend to focus on all the deficits and everything that's going wrong. And to me, the hidden good was so essential because, and still is, because we're focusing on what's going right and building on it. You know, how do we build? How do we connect people to the, you know, partners and resources and possibilities? So yeah, really, you know, it was a huge learning curve. Definitely challenged me, but also, you know, helped me grow in ways that I never would have imagined, and opportunities and so many doors to work with so many different organizations and partners in Southeast Asia and beyond.
What was it like having the identity of being a social entrepreneur? Because I remember, you know, your TEDx, the various, you know, profiles and the talks you gave. What was it like?
I think it was loved. You know, I think the people and big group of different stakeholders, you know, find those different possibilities. I also felt like it was a lot of responsibility as a social entrepreneur. You know, you're not just like a distinction between social entrepreneur and entrepreneur. Like, what's the difference? And I remember even the that label, it was entrepreneur to me, I had to kind of grapple with and make sense of myself, and that I almost has this responsibility that you're needs to make a positive difference in the world. And it comes with expectations, both that I put on myself to really make the work that I do count, but also expectations that come with what people expect from you. Whether that's in, you know, initial conversations or the different committees or boards that I sat on, I often represented that view of which I felt like, you know, it felt like, you know, I was carrying a lot of yeah, I wouldn't say it's a burden, but it was really like a responsibility, and in representing a sector and wanting it to be sustainable last as well. Because I think a lot of the times we, you know, social enterprise or nonprofits are like, how do we actually have and that makes that sustainable difference as well. I think it was something that it was an identity I came to felt some resistance at the beginning, and wanting to embrace that. I think I also had put aside a lot of these expectations I had for myself, and to see that I could define it through the work that I was doing, and decision on from there.
I think one thing I remember about, you know, the conversations we have, of course, is really that dissonance between, I think, the external phase, right, of being a social entrepreneur, which is about, you know, the publicity, about advocacy work, and of course, the community support, but also the, you know, grounded reality of the work, right, which is working in an organization with, you know, low funding, with high goals, and, you know, sometimes like hard partners, right? So how did you feel about that, you know, dissonance or that dynamic?
I think there's also the whole part about like, I mean, to me, social entrepreneurship is about doing good and doing well. So do good for the world and also be sustainable. And that comes with, you know, when I started at the Hidden Good, I had a lot of experience. I had zero business experience, right? Zero experience like a company and organization. So thankfully, I had really that set me down as, okay, this is a P&L, like, you know, cash. I had to learn, like, there's all the fun, you know, kind of parts of being, you know, in the space, that whether it's attending like conferences and meeting different people and going for events, and then there's also all the nitty gritty stuff that scenes for this work to happen, whether it's managing a team, kind of scaling the work, but all those little things that keep an organization going. And so yeah, you know, I think and it was really, I think in 20, so I started in 2014. I think it was around 2017, 2018 that I started to feel a bit burnt out. And it didn't make sense because I was like, you know, I've basically created a job that I love. You know, I'm doing work that I love. How can I feel burnt out? And I think that is this almost this narrative in the social impact space as well to continue giving and giving and often not, the work is so important that a lot of people forget to replenish themselves. And I was definitely like one of those. I was like, oh yeah, I'm doing what I love. How can I be tired, right? Then I was like, being able to really sit down and reconcile that for myself and up so I could, others, and be able to do that work and continue doing the work. So many good people in the social impact space. Also hard, and then burnout, and then who's going to continue doing good work? So I think that is kind of like that behind the scenes of space that doesn't get talked about enough. Really hope that we think of good people to continue doing good work is often how do we think about that personal success.
So I gotta ask, how did burnout show up for you? Because it takes different forms for different people.
Yeah, no, I think I was less excited about the work that I was doing. I think I felt that there was so much, like I had to be everything for everyone. And for me, that was a big lesson in learning to ask for. I couldn't do it all. Being able to look for mentors and really about leadership, I think that has been a huge thing. And the space I'm in now, leadership organizing, because I've seen what happens. Leaders take on a lot and they don't know how to lead on their team. They don't know how to support and they don't know how to set themselves up, for that personal sustainability as well. For me, it was a lot of like just feeling that I was a lot less excited. I was feeling time, and it didn't really work at an organization that I love. Like, how can I be feeling this way? I realized that burnout doesn't just happen to people who don't like their job. It can happen when you love your work as well. So that was a very eye-opening year for me. So one of my board members was like, why don't you just take like a mini sabbatical and learn how to do nothing? And that was huge, just learning for someone that's always on the go and always out in the world doing like 10,000 things, that was actually one of the hardest but most eye-opening kind of moments for me. And something that I think is essential in like a leadership practice is to create time for reflection and that space just to be and realize that we are not only valuable to the world when we're doing things, but it's rethinking the ways in which that we can contribute, and if we can't contribute, so definitely a huge part of my that's kind of led me to how I think about leadership and the work that I do today.
How did you talk about burnout with other people? Was it very private, or was it, something you talked about with other people? Because, I've gone through burnout myself and it's exhausting, right? And I like to believe that I've gotten a little smarter at it over time, or wiser, hopefully. But it feels like a very private battle that a lot of folks have, right? So I'm just kind of curious how that played out for you.
Yeah, no, I talk actually, because I think part of it in just breaking this cycle is not making it, possible for people to alone in this, and that it's okay to ask for support and get help. So, I definitely talked about it in my organization, talked about it on social media. But more importantly, I think it was providing platforms for others to find that place of rest as well as while we build. I think it's an either or. It's always like, how do we create these practices to be doing the work that you're doing sustainably? Things that I was doing, and still I'm part of actually. So Ashoka, ChangemakerXchange, and I still am one of their leaders right now. We organize these summits and retreats for changemakers, others changemakers across the world to come together, and a lot of it is focused on collaboration across different sectors. More importantly, it's also a space for these people that are in the social impact, social innovation, social entrepreneurship to realize that they need to find themselves so that they don't burn out, and point where there is, I think there are different levels of burnout too, and not to make the point that's like past the point of no return, because I know friends that have like had ramifications of being super burnt out, and not being able to function, and yeah, so being able to kind of be a resource in this space of like well-being as well, whole space of well-being, because sometimes it can be seen as like, oh, this like, oh, just yoga and meditation, and it's really about how you bring well-being into like the social impact organizations where you're so driven by the cause and by purpose that it's easy to kind of
When you talk about burnout, and obviously talk about normalizing it, implies that there is a stigma around it, right? And a fear of it. Why does that exist?
I think, and I used to think like, the whole like hustling, like, burning the candle at both ends, I think was part of showing that hard work. And I think that, especially of, growing up in Singapore and Asia, of working really hard and was something that was, well, it's, I think hard work is important. I don't think it's but hard work at the expense of what cost, like what is the cost of that, burning the candle at both ends, never sleeping, kind of this hustle hero mentality. I think especially in the startup space, just kind of, and while I think that having a good work ethic is so important, work ethic, sacrificing your health, your well-being, that long-term personal sustainability I'm talking, especially mental health right now, and this, these pandemic well is coming up to the forefront, and it's, not to work in a different way, that produces great work, but not everything else of family, of life, of your health and well-being, both. So, yeah.
And what's interesting is that, from there, you started wrapping up your work at Hidden Good, and you went off to do a master's program at the Harvard Graduate School of Education. So what was your motivation to do that?
Yeah, I mean, while I loved the work that I was doing at the Hidden Good, and I thought I could continue doing this for a while, there was some part of me that felt that was, kind of bubbling, and something, I felt like I was drawn to looking at and feeling like I explore this more deeply, and I think that there's something more that I should be doing. I couldn't put my finger on it just yet. So, this opportunity to go to Harvard, the Graduate School of Education. I mean, I still love it. It was very interdisciplinary. So while it was based at the Graduate School of Education, it was at the business school, at the Kennedy School of Public Policy, I was really interested in more conscious, inclusive organizations and leaders. How do we set organizations up to thrive? And that was something that kind of came out from the work that I was so many different types of organizations. Organizations do better than others, and why does, and how do we think about that leadership in a larger, more systemic way? So these are questions I was sitting with for a while. I knew I probably wanted to go to grad school and do my master's at some point, but I kept pushing it back. But good, it felt like the right time. So I executive director, but I'm still on the board and still support the team. But it was hard, because it was something that, as I mentioned earlier, those I had, it was, I was doing intertwined with my identity, that the role me, and I also kind of knew like, okay, the identity that I had, it was time to step away, even if it was And even if it took courage of that chore to take that step into something that I knew was calling out to me to do. Yeah, I mean, Harvard was great, and my eyes in terms of how we think about. I think a lot of the time when we think about issues in the world, it tends to be very into or in kind of. But this program and that I was doing for my master's was really, we want to solve quality, right? Or how do we look at it from space, from the business space, from the policy space, so that we're looking at it in a more integrated. The worlds are complex, right? And we can't look at it just from one perspective. So really strategically about collaboration, about partnerships, about world change as well. So yeah, I loved it. And definitely, made me really think about impact as well and how we approach our effective manner in thinking about how we leverage resources out there to change more lasting and sustainable. And
So what's interesting is that one thing we discovered was we went to Harvard to learn very different things, right? So I went to the Harvard Business School, which people like to say is the West Point of capitalism. And then you went to Harvard Graduate School of Education, which is probably not the West Point of capitalism. So what would you say that you chose to learn over there?
Yeah, so I was actually an inclusion fellow at Harvard as well. At school, but I actually ended up hosting a panel at the business school. Interesting, and even I think a lot as well, right? One of my favorite classes that I actually took at the business school was called Leading, and it was the first time looking at how we can create more inclusive or spaces, and I don't think that was something they taught at Harvard even. Conversations are shifting. Every school, as you know, is but what different perspectives of the different school attracted, because I think it really deepened my understanding why people do what they do, which I think ultimately at the end of the day should different people where they are. How do we businesses where they are to move them to organizations, of policy and humanize it so it's not just theory. And I think it's eye-opening to meet different groups. I think the schools attract is you can definitely feel any school, but I think that was what I loved most. It was that I was able to kind of different people and understand the why people do certain things, so that I could really think about how we working with leaders and organizations.
What would you say that you learned or enjoyed the most while at Harvard?
I loved, and I think I've always loved learning, but I think it was learning in, learning together with people different from myself. And I think that's why I chose to do my master's in undergrad, and in such a of people that were just coming from so many different spaces and so many different sectors and industries, and really making sense of that for myself, because I think it's in that diversity that I really get to learn, and the ways in which issues or I thought were very new insight on leadership and organizations and education, and yeah, so I think as cliched as but just the people, right? Because people everywhere and anywhere, but it was the people in the context of the learning. Having that be overlaid was definitely, I think something I'm just so glad that I had the opportunity to do.
Yeah, and what's interesting is, you know, talking about diversity, talking about people, talking about equity, talking about inclusion. Um, were there any tough times or times when you got challenged about what you thought or your preconceived identities or notions that got challenged while you were there?
Hmm. I mean, I think I think there was, in terms of challenging, I think all the time, and I read like an article or something that, I think I took a responsibility, and there was a whole, should we be supporting these, like, like, with what people see as uh, organizations that are not doing positive things out in the world, to be, or basically try to work with people that you think are negative in the world. Do you kind of like go the complete 180, avoid them, work with activists and people, kind of social work stays, and or if you try to bridge those gaps, people have very different perspectives. Like, oh, even the whole divestment thing that was happening, at Harvard, like, if they anymore, is it more important to have a say in the way these large corporations are making decisions, or just put your actually care about it? I think a lot of these are ethical, right? Like, what do you believe in? And that was, it made me like what is important to me in my life, and even now in working with organizations, you know, some people will only work with certain others. And I think it's like, do I need to be this self, or is it more important for me? Is it more of a priority and to be those gaps and to are and kind of find possibilities of yeah, completely.
Oh, what a journey. And I totally agree with you. It's a lot of ethical dilemmas, especially around divestment, but I think it's also a very uh, American approach, but I think we're definitely going to see that, I think, globalize further. And I think different topics like that will continue to percolate through,
Yeah.
Southeast Asia as well. So starting to wrap things up here, could you tell us a time that you have been brave?
Yeah, I mean, when I thought about this question too, because I think when I think about courage and bravery, it's what you're willing to, of fear, as I'm sure you've heard, but it's really that willingness to step into the into the uncertainty, and both away from this identity that I had held so close as um, a social entrepreneur, and asking myself, where else can I make change in the world? Uh, Now in the work that I'm doing with like leadership and organizations and companies, and thinking about this, required, I think, me to have that shift in identity and thinking about how can I make change, and where can I be most effective. Um, for me, as I think of like a specific instance that was actually right when I was in the middle of labor, and I was on a walk, so I was walking with my husband out on like outside our house. And I think they're about like 15 hours into labor at that point in time, maybe 14. And I think there was this sense in terms of stepping into this new identity and new role as a mother, and that courage almost in letting go of who life I've had. I used to do, especially well, working with all these that I had, and being able to let go to this new version of who I was as a mother and as a change maker, all these new things that And I just remember looking at that. We were standing outside, and Abdullah said, you kind of welcome your baby into this world. And I think it's that like moment there was something that just shifted, and that fear kind of subsided, and this previous and stepping into this new one, and that courage. I don't know what the future holds, but I believe that that we'll find it. And for me, and for my family, and for myself. So being outside, under this thinking to myself, this moment of bringing this, our baby girl, and the effect and impact that would have on work was, scary in the most beautiful way, but true, I think, and having that courage, bring this life into this world, and embrace this new version of myself in this new season was definitely something that I think I will remember of my life. Season of life will demand a new version of me, and I think it's definitely constantly daily. I think it's a practice. I think that's the practice that allows us to keep growing and evolving, and not and being enough to step out into the zone and that stretch zone, out of our comfort zone, back to rest and recharge. Has been a big part of this.
Wow, thank you so much, Jiezhen, for sharing. So I'd love to wrap things up here by really paraphrasing the three big themes that I got from this conversation. The first, of course, is thank you so much for sharing about your social entrepreneurship journey, about what it was like to, be, I remember you writing in the past, hashtag Goal Boss, in that sense. But also, juggling the identities as a public face, as well as the actual reality of building a business in terms of doing well as well as doing good. And also, I think the burnout that came at some point of time and how it showed up for you. And we got to discuss how it showed up for you and why you want to normalize it and why there's some stigma around it. The second thing, of course, thank you so much for sharing about Harvard, why you went there, what you chose to learn there, and what you got out of it. I think that's an important moment for so many different folks. And lastly, I really love what you shared about this, not just at the end in terms of your brave journey as a mother and as a leader, but also, throughout this entire podcast, you really shared about what it means to embrace identities as they change from season to season. And I think that was a beautiful journey that you shared throughout. And also, congratulations on the kid. And I definitely agree with the fact that becoming a parent is definitely a new chapter in life to be embraced.
Yeah, for sure. I think definitely one of my greatest teachers, and huge Steve. It definitely has had me grow in ways that I never knew.
Thank you so much, Jiezhen, for coming on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Okay,